So you opened this video hoping to learn how to build, right? That was a mistake. Hey, I'm Livecold and I play Minecraft on occasion, and I like it when things look pretty. And I'm sure you do too. So here's some tips on how to build well from someone who has some very, very, very baseline knowledge on the subject, because I streamed it a little bit right before I left for college. What we're going to be focusing on today is build size. So larger versus smaller. These two are based off the same reference image. One of them looks a little bit better than the other. Ignore all those purple houses in the back. We'll get to them. They're very unimportant, I promise. So this is the first house. This is the one I built, just testing it out, wanting to improve my building skills. Building with reference is like really good actually, because you have to convert like these types of lines that may not translate perfectly into Minecraft into a way that looks correct. So it's a really good way of like getting yourself to think outside the box. Like, how am I supposed to make this angle of the roof with the blocks that I have? Or how do I make things line up so that it looks similar enough to the reference image that you can tell that they're the same. With this one, you can tell it's pretty large. There is a lot of empty space up in here, especially these pieces. Oh, sometimes I forget I can't do that kind of stuff. Anyways, you can see how I tried to get that green border in that upper window, but there wasn't room for the more orangey border. You can also see how I tried to do that down here as well. All in all, this keeps as much of those original details as I can, including this piece here, this white piece above the door. It keeps as much of that original detail as I possibly can, with the exception of like, there should be a stripe there that is in the original image that I can't get in here due to the limitations of Minecraft building. It's not a bad build necessarily, but you can make it better. You can definitely see that this looks a little wonky, this looks a little wonky, and that's just because it's taking up too much space. There's not enough going on for the space that takes up. This is like, what is this, like 7 blocks? And there's not a lot going on there. There's 7 blocks there, there's 2 windows, and that's it. You need to have more going on in your builds if you want them to look better. Obviously, this doesn't apply for everything. Sometimes large swaths of blank space work really well, especially if you're doing like certain types of building. I don't know. I can't think off the top of my head right now, but you want to have packed in detail. Not super packed in. You strike a balance. Everything's strike a balance. But you want to pack in that detail. And there are times when you need to let some of those details go as well. So let's move on to this one. Now in this one, it's a lot more condensed, but it looks a lot nicer. I dropped out some of those details from the original build and changed up some stuff so that you can tell that the roof shape is a lot different. It really condenses down this upper portion into a much smaller space, and it only keeps those essential details from that portion. There is no green border around here, but you can still see some of the green on the underside, the green trim underneath. The stairs on the roof really make this nice and smooth, as opposed to over here where we did not have. I think I just forgot to put the stairs on here. I think that's what happened, is I forgot to put stairs on the underside. Anyways, you can also tell that down here I condensed these windows a ton. There is no green trim on these anymore, and you can still tell that it's referenced off the same house. This piece as well is gone. There are a lot of times when you're going to need to drop some details, because including those details make the rest of your build too big proportionately. And while it's definitely possible to make a large-scale build, probably on the scale of this, using a reference like that and keeping most, if not all, of those details, I'm not someone who necessarily knows how to do that, and it's probably easier to do something like this, especially when you're like me and you like to build to the scale of the Minecraft player, because something like this, especially with the double doors when the original image only has single doors, something like this just feels like it's a little bit too large proportionately to the character. So yeah, drop details when you can, figure out what looks good, what you don't need, and if you can live without a detail and you don't think you need it, go without it. And then I immediately forgot that lesson on the next build I made because I let hubris get the better of me. So anyways, I learned my lesson from the greenhouse and decided to make this Victorian house, but start out much, much smaller. You can tell that here, it's even less wide than that greenhouse. This is like what, 7? This is 7 blocks wide, whereas this one is 10. This is 10 blocks wide, that one's 7 blocks wide. Like, I tried to make it as small as possible so I could really pack that detail in. And it kind of works here if you're not really looking at the reference image, but if you pull up the reference image, it's not quite right. And now, given this is a very, very detailed reference, and I'm trying to pack in as much of that as I can so it looks very similar to the original, but the windows here, not quite right. It's just one block in the middle of everything. Doesn't quite work right. This piece here as well is a little bit weird. I know that that's what happens in that build, kind of, but just the way that the shapes play out, it doesn't quite work. It doesn't hold all that detail. Overall, it just doesn't quite work out correctly. There's not enough room to pack in everything you need in order to make it look similar to the reference. And again, this is a very, very, very detailed reference image that I chose because I hate myself and I want to suffer. Like, a lot of this just looks too small. Like, the tower could probably be fixed a bit if it had like more of a lip on the roof, like down here. But overall, it just kind of looks a little bit off, a little bit wrong, especially in comparison to the reference image, and that's because of the sheer amount of detail in that reference image. So I decided to do it again, but scale it up, because it didn't feel like I could fit all that detail in the image into the build, which is exactly what I and you shouldn't do, because it doesn't work, and it didn't work. You can see that I tried to get that border on that big square window on the top. I tried to make these windows proportionate on the bottom in comparison, while still keeping this all centered. It's just not quite right, and it did allow me to capture more of those details, such as this little balcony on the top edge, as well as this piece in the roof down here. I don't know if that's called a gable or not. I don't know housing. I don't know, like, housing terms or anything. But overall, like, the tower still looks funky, even though the shape is more correct. Tower's still weird. This is still weird. It's just, the details are just off. And given a better builder than me could probably make this better. And it doesn't look too bad if you're not comparing it to the reference. But I'm comparing it to the reference, and I'm a perfectionist, and I want it to be perfect. So what I did was I decided to take a page out of real life and basically trace the build into Minecraft. So in like real life drawing art classes, there's this thing called the grid method where you place a grid over the top of the thing you're drawing and then you translate that to your paper, which also has a grid on it of the same number of squares, and you copy it. You know those like children's coloring books where one half of the drawing is made and there's a grid over it, and then the other half of the drawing is blank and there's a grid over it, and you're supposed to copy it, like mirror it? It's basically that, but if you're doing a whole image. So my thought was like, okay, so maybe if I take the image, I can put a grid over it, and then I can rebuild it, and it'll give me a look at like what I screwed up in terms of all the proportions. So it's like the tracing of the images to practice drawing and practice proportions of your drawings, figures and stuff. But if you were to do it for building, the issue with that is you can't have half boxes. Like, it's all or nothing. Like, you could have a window that's maybe halfway into this piece or halfway into this piece, and you gotta be like, do I want to put the window here or put the window here? And that can screw you over. That can really screw you over. Like this window right here was perfectly 2x2 on my gridded drawing, but the sides of it weren't perfect squares. I'll put an image of what I'm talking about over this so that I can show you in terms of reference. But like if you look at the grid, you can see this is fully encompassed within a 2x2 set of squares, or mostly at least. There's a piece on the bottom that doesn't quite fit, but it's close enough. But the border on the outside, not quite. There's a bunch of stuff that just doesn't line up perfectly to Minecraft, which is really difficult, especially when you're getting into the roofs and stuff. Because this tower, like that's the worst tower of all of the ones. Like, it's just so sad. It's so sad. All in all, it just didn't work well. Much at all. basically, in conclusion, you just have to pick and choose what details you want to use, what you want to lose. That was kind of unintentional, but it works. You got to be really careful when you're choosing which details you want to use and which ones you want to lose, because some of them will just not work correctly because they just take up space rather than adding much of anything. Those windows are a prime example because the trim is on the original, but they just really take up space in the build and don't add much of anything, whereas down here, the trim is gone and the windows sort of stand out more, especially in terms of the stuff around it, because they take up a greater percentage of the space down there. Basically, like, trying to keep all that detail and build perfectly to the reference, it just doesn't really work. And that's partially because you can't create those details perfectly in Minecraft, like I was saying here, where there were sort of half boxes on either side of this. You're not going to be able to create that unless you have like a mod like Chisel and Bits or something. It could also be that like Victorian style houses like these are just really, really difficult to build perfectly in Minecraft. Or maybe they're hard to build because of all the detail. Or maybe it's both. Anyways, sometimes big is good, sometimes big is bad, and sometimes they're both bad because this is Minecraft, and so you have so many restrictions on how you can detail because of the size of the blocks. Hope this helps! Anyways, if you, for whatever reason, want me to teach you something else about building, leave it in the comments down below, and I will do it so badly you'll leave more confused than you started out.